Leipzig, Germany, 1774. The German author Goethe publishes the quintessential romantic love story, The Sorrows of Young Werther. It tells the story of a passionate, doomed love affair between a young poet called Werther and a beautiful, clever young woman called Charlotte. Unfortunately for Werther, Charlotte is married, so the love is impossible from the very start. But that doesn't stop Werther, a dreamy and practical young man who loves the arts above all else. Like Chatterton, Werther is under pressure to have a sensible career and join bourgeois life, but he can think of only one thing: the impulses of his heart. Eventually, Werther can't take it anymore and kills himself. But rather than condemning him as a lunatic and a hothead, Goethe, one of the founding fathers of Romanticism, directs all our sympathies towards Werther. We're supposed to be on his side, admiring his passionate and entirely impractical attitude to love. The book becomes the most popular novel of a generation. 3 million copies are printed. Napoleon declares it the greatest work of European literature, and it dramatically changes how many people think of love, privileging dramatic outpourings of feeling over more traditional, rational concerns for class, lineage, and money. For a romantic, it's always right and noble to follow your heart. The disastrous results that follow aren't any argument. They're just proof of how desiccated and heartless the so-called adult, sensible world can be. Madrid, Spain, 1798. The artist Francisco Goya produces one of his most iconic images, titled "The Sleep of Reason Brings Out Monsters." It captures a quintessential romantic interest in the limits of reason and the power of the irrational over humans' fragile minds. To be romantic is to have sympathy for madness and to hold an almost vengeful attitude towards bombastic claims as to the triumph of rationality, science, and logic. The Lake District, England, December 1799. A young English poet called William Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy move into what's set to become one of the most famous residences in the history of English literature, Dove Cottage in Grasmere on the edge of the Lake District. Here they will spend the next 9 years, and Wordsworth will write some of the greatest poetry in the English language, celebrating something that's very under threat: the natural world. He'll write about daffodils, oak trees, clouds, butterflies and rivers, and his work will charm and seduce Europe. Within a generation there will, in Wordsworth's own estimation, be more tourists than sheep in the Lake District. Most importantly, running through Wordsworth's poetry is an abiding hatred for everything mechanical and industrial. When many years later a railway line threatens to pass through the Lake District, Wordsworth and his followers do everything they can to have the train, a symbol of Wordsworth's hated technology, rerouted. To be a romantic is to take the side of nature against industry. It's to prefer a daffodil to a viaduct, a tree to a factory. At the moment when huge swathes of Britain are being covered in the often monstrous new cities that are making Europe rich, Wordsworth, the quintessential romantic, speaks up for the natural and the simple life. Niagara, United States, September 1829. The American painter Thomas Cole paints one of his most characteristic images of the mighty Niagara Falls with a couple of Native Americans in the foreground. Cole makes his name as a painter of sublime scenes, vast landscapes of the American interior, showing nature at its most dignified and impressive. Man looks lost and puny by comparison. This too is a typical romantic attitude, for romantics don't believe in God, but they go in search of the emotions one might once have had around religion, and locate them in the big, wide-open spaces of nature. To be a romantic is to find relief from the pressures of competitive city life in the sort of natural grandeur that transcends all human achievements and concerns. Westminster, London, April 1847. 14 years after some fairly incompetent officials destroy the British Parliament with fire, a new building reopens designed by a rising star architect, Augustus Pugin. Oddly, even though the building is new, it's made to look old, very, very old, medieval in fact. It's full of suits of armour and seated angels. When the architect Pugin defends the building, he argues that his building is noble because it harks back to his country's pre-industrial past, before it grew obsessed, he's careful to add, with money or technology. It begins a cult of the Middle Ages, a big theme in Romanticism, which identifies in the world of knights and castles a nobility that is thought missing from the factories and shopping arcades of the modern world. Saint-Germain, Paris, May 1863. The French poet Charles Baudelaire writes a prose poem celebrating an unusual character whom he calls a flâneur, a stroller or loafer. a casual wanderer who has no particular job to go to and just spends his time observing busy street life of a modern city, threading his way through the crowds, strolling instead of rushing, sampling people's conversations and creating narratives for others' lives. Baudelaire, a typical romantic, admires the flaneur's playfulness and lack of practicality. This person isn't a waste of time. It doesn't matter that he doesn't have a job. For Baudelaire, he is a prince, unlike the boring wage slaves rushing to the new offices of capitalism.